Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us in this edition of the BRM Brown Bag session. This is episode number 22 with Baziel Barends from South Africa. Baziel, Baz, as we popularly call him, is the founder of Radish Weight Consulting, focused on sustainable business and digital transformation. He's been a board member for the globally focused BRM Institute and operations director for Linked Retail Solutions. Thank you so much, Baz, for joining us today in the BRM Brown Bag. It's an absolute delight to have you here, and we hope to see and hear from you about your experience around BRM over the last 2 decades.
Thanks, Suresh. It's a great pleasure to be here. Thanks very much for the invitation. And yes, as you say, business relationship management, I know it's a big part of your world, and it's been a big part of my world over the last around about 20 years. And my engagement with BRM started not as a BRM or in a BRM role, but working alongside BRMs in a multinational company in South Africa. And first as a technology person, as an engineer, and then as a member of an executive team where we were growing this business relationship management capability in the 2000s. And we formed a team of business relationship managers. And as an executive, what I realized was I was part of this business relationship management capability and had to deal with we had about 10 business divisions, and the business relationship management team sat within in the IT division of this organization. And what we started seeing is that as executives, we were interacting like business relationship managers. But what we found was that we were very busy as executives looking after the strategy of the organization, of the IT organization, working with executives on the other side of the business. And sometimes relationships tended to lose focus. And we found over the years that the business relationship managers played a pivotal role in focusing those relationships. That was for me a real interest working alongside the business relationship managers. I saw brilliant business BRMs over the years. I saw some BRMs who perhaps didn't quite fit into that space, and saw what worked and what didn't work. And then a few years ago, I had the privilege of taking over the BRM team in this organization, and also had to recruit business relationship managers, see what type of industries they came from, what worked well, and had to build an engagement model between the IT division and the various business divisions, build a rejuvenated engagement model. So at that point, started engaging with the BRM Institute, and there was this wealth of information that we dealt with. And so, that's been the history in the corporate space with me. Subsequently, I've, as you said, started Radish Weed Consulting, and have been working with the BRM Institute in various roles. And, have gone into a board role and also worked in a team focused on a paradigm called Relationshipism, which is part of the evolved space that we believe BRMs should go into. So that's some of my history. I can talk a bit more about my interaction with the BRM Institute, working with evolving some of the content there with the BRM members of the BRM. But that's basically been my history with BRM. It's a space that I've been really passionate about over the years. And it's been great to see how it's been evolving with this global community of thousands of BRMs that are contributing to the energy.
Right, absolutely great. So I wanted to kind of get started off with the evolved BRM around the relationshipism and the relationship-centered organizations. You have been playing a pivotal role in augmenting that part. So what is generally, and what are you seeing as relationship-centered organizations, and why is it getting even more important these days than before? And because your involvement with a lot of client engagements on digital transformation, how does they all connect together to make it much more comprehensive to deliver business value to your end clients or business partners?
So great question. Thanks, Suresh. When I started working as a volunteer with the BRM Institute on this paradigm of relationshipism, the 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 essence of it was that business was changing. We actually started working on it just before COVID. COVID accelerated the visibility of what we were looking at. But we'd seen that business was changing, that the paradigms which we'd seen 100 years ago that had still been prevalent in business, like Taylorism and Fordism, it's about efficiency and it's about you are working on a wheel and I micromanage you and that's how we create value in a business. We felt that that paradigm was changing. We saw organizations globally were really thriving if they had a purpose that was beyond profit and efficiency. So, profit being really critical to a business, but just like the air that we breathe, profit is not the reason you exist. So we see companies like B corporations, companies like Patagonia, who are very purpose oriented, looking at a new type of bottom line in business where it's not just about the profit. If I said my purpose is to breathe, that's just not an inspiring purpose. But we're seeing more and more organizations that are inspired around having people that are more intrinsically motivated. So not having people that are, machines and being micromanaged, given more autonomy. We've seen this in agile teams, having more autonomy and people then being more motivated, and then the productivity soars in organizations. So people, this purpose that's inspiring, and then planet. We've seen like Patagonia companies again, many companies which are that are driving agendas which are environmentally responsible.
Sure.
And we're finding that their customer bases, for instance, are really drawn towards those companies because of their environmental approach, and not about harming the communities that they're in, or the land that they occupy. It's about actually contributing to the environment. So we came up with this, what we call this new triple bottom line of business, which was people, purpose, and planet.
Right.
So that was the relationshipism paradigm. And we then used a lot of that information in the new BRM information, the new BRMP, the BRM body of knowledge, because we saw in COVID that businesses that said, you know what, we can't have people working remotely because we've got to see them in front of us. And, if they're going to not be on site, we're going to lose productivity. And, it's crazy. We can't do that. And, we saw what happened. The companies that didn't buy into that new philosophy, that people can be at their best, even if you're not micromanaging them, those companies struggled. But we've seen this new business where when we focus on people, we give them the right amount of autonomy. The purpose is a genuine purpose, and you are focused on really good goals, such as environmental goals, that the organization thrives. So I think COVID actually brought that even more to the fore. The other big thing is that all organizations have got relationships.
Right.
It's relationships have been there since the beginning of time. But the thing about relationships is, can we, can we make those relationships work for the business using all of these elements that I spoke about, people, purpose, and planet, actually use it to produce results. So for instance, you and I, we've had a relationship for a long time. We've been building the relationship, but ultimately what you need to do is you need to build that relationship to get to some kind of partnership where you're actually doing something together. So this brown bag session is an example of a relationship becoming more partnership oriented to produce value.
Right.
And that's what we want to see more in business, is these inspired ways of working to build relationships, to become more partnership oriented, to be able to produce more value for the organization. And so ultimately what it comes down to is this converged purpose in business. And we call it the law of inverse purpose. If you think of it, you think of the IT organization. If our purpose a while back was to focus on the technology, and the business had a different purpose. We want to produce, these kind of products for our customers. And the purpose was like maybe a bit divergent.
Right.
And what we found is as the purpose converged and became narrower and smaller, the impact widened. So this is almost this paradox, this law of inverse purpose. The more IT getting closer to business, the more impact. So the purpose converging, the impact increasing. And that's what the BRM role can play a big role in that space to help with that focus of the relationships then translating into partnerships to produce results. So that's some of the elements in terms of this new space. I think the space has always been there.
Right.
It's just that people are recognizing the value that is being created by this relationship focus and this relationship centeredness to produce partnerships, to produce results.
Absolutely, that's spot on. And in terms of one of the challenges every company has been looking at is the cultural shift. So, which we can all tell about that we want to be a profitable organizations. We want to make that leap ahead in terms of market share and sustainable growth. But really, can BRMs drive the culture change as from your own experience, Baz, in dealing with a lot of companies? How does a BRM create the culture change for an organizations to go towards that path? Because it's a question of who rings the bell for the cat, right? I mean, everybody wants to make a change, but where do you start with? So what has been your experience predominantly on the cultural shift when someone is stereotyped of this is the way that we have done business so far, so we'll continue on the same space, as opposed to talking something very unconventional or revolutionary? How do you play that in the reality?
It's such an important question, Suresh, and it confuses a lot of people. But it's actually quite simple. Firstly, there is this capability that everybody's involved in. So as an executive, I was contributing into the business relationship, but I would have my daily job to do, and the business people would have their job to do. And so we didn't really focus that much on relationships. It was about the plans and the projects, etc. When the BRM came into it, was the focus was actually on the relationship. And so, we were able to have concrete examples where the really strong business relationships managers were sitting with the executive teams on the IT side, on the business side, identifying what type of behaviors were perhaps toxic. It might not have been the executive teams had largely bought into these concepts. And, maybe on the floor, there were members that said, I don't care about this relationship stuff. I just want to get the report done. And then, they don't get involved with anybody on the team, in the business, or on, in the IT side. And you'd end up everybody having to sit, executives have to sit in meetings, figuring out how to do this. So the business relationship manager was able to, do the translation of what the business was looking for, what the IT teams were looking for, and go in there and deal with the relationship challenges in a way. It's I can only describe it as an art. It's identifying in that situation that person, maybe there's a genuine concern, that person has, and the business relationship manager would bring all those tools that we've had, which, now as part of the BRMP, at CBRM, etc. There's more of those tools. But, our BRMs had those tool sets and they worked in those situations and they changed that kind of behavior. And so what we see with the culture of an organization is a hard thing to change, because culture is built up of all the interactions of that organization from day one.
Right.
And so all those relationships have contributed to a culture. But it is possible to shift culture. As executives, we were able to shift culture by giving less airtime to, the types of behaviors you didn't want to see in the organization, and by encouraging certain new types of ways of interacting. And what we saw with the business relationship managers is that, they were able to go in and deal with certain frustrations, and encourage certain types of behaviors. So if there was a lack of convergence between IT and business, and I talk about IT and business because that's the world that I grew up in. But obviously, this convergence now we're seeing across the organization where there are multiple areas of the business, and we don't see them as silos. What we started seeing is that the executives of all the, if it's HR or finance or IT, everybody was speaking one language because it was less about my piece of the world. It was about the converged purpose and what does the organization want to do. So the business relationship manager typically goes into whichever those areas are and works on some of those behaviors and says, things like, I see you're interested in your project. The group needs this. Can we help maybe get it into a pipeline? What's your thinking around the converged purpose of the organization? And then, have that discussion, make that person feel heard. And in that um, that process, that we typically saw that some of the behaviors would change. People would become more focused on, the purpose of the organization, on the converged, element as opposed to the silos. So, we actually saw that, and I don't say just the BRMs. The BRMs are points of focus of the relationship, but it was the BRMs along with the various executives and members of the parts of the business, the partners in the business that actually managed to shift culture. So I think I've seen it where BRMs have managed to shift culture, and in terms of the more modern way of doing business, where it's more relationship centered as opposed to transactional and micromanaging. I think the role of the business relationship manager is becoming even more critical.
Excellent. So, in terms of, I like the word with the evolved BRM that we are talking about is it's not just about IT anymore, right? We have business partners from finance, HR, and I like this whole thing of getting everybody onboarded in the business relationship management journey. So, are you seeing increasingly business partners, BRMs in other functions being now focused upon so that we bring in the real convergence of all the different parties? So give you an example. The vendor department is focused on getting the best quote at the lowest cost, right? So it doesn't focus on whether the person is actually delivering value. The least person gets the deal. At one end, the business wants real value provider, let's say Radish, to go there and present the thing, but they are little on a higher side from a cost perspective. Then they say, no, we don't get it. So is that going to change at that level, Bas, as we start focusing on different functions? Because their holistic goals were very different and were about the individual goals. So how is that going to change the dimension if you want to bring in that common unified language and conversation that makes it everybody starts to think as with one single unified purpose?
So yeah, great question, Suresh. And you use the word language, so that's a good start. The language is evolving. We used to think about the silo of IT and the silo of business, and that's where business relationship management kind of started there, because IT had their agenda, and we were going to get this thing, and it's a really cool technology, and business saying, but we don't want this. This is actually the functionality we want. But we have seen that businesses are moving away from those silos. So while IT has been the one that sometimes has been in trouble and where the relationship has needed to be mended, because businesses are now evolving and they're saying it's about, we've got this purpose as a business. We want to contribute something to our local economy or to, our society, or, there's a certain product that we've got that's really making people's lives better. So suddenly that's not just an IT thing.
Sure.
And that then you need to have the finance departments working with, you need to have the HR, all the departments, the language starts changing that. And we started seeing that the silo mentality was falling away. They are very difficult to get rid of. And I would say all organizations still have, silos, but they've started to fall away. And the thinking has been what's right for the organization. So now you've got IT and business, and we don't call it now the one side and the other side, they all are partners in this whole purpose of the organization. And the BRMs, while they may have started in IT, what organizations are starting to see is they don't necessarily need to sit there. It may still be some companies are still dealing with that technology, business dimension, and it's still two silos, and the BRMs can sit there, but the BRMs can sit now outside of that, anywhere in the organization, because it is this more organizationally focused element, as you say. How do we measure value across the business? And if there's a process that's being, somebody's being selected on the HR side or on the finance side, you look at it holistically, not just what's good for finance or what's good for HR, but there might be, we did HR implementations where there were technology elements. So everybody needed to work together. And that is where a lot of the times you've got project managers, and you've got business analysts that go in there. But when the relationship issues happen, and they can be big, the relationship manager is then your single point of focus of that relationship. So yeah, I think very much a game changer in terms of creating value across the organization. And it's, practically it is happening in organizations that are embracing this idea of relationship-centered organization.
Finally, one question is, what's the future for BRMs as we start to evolve in the post-pandemic, and as we have a lot of hats to don of multitasking and areas to focus? Where do you think the BRM should focus to finally take them and their respective organizations to the feat that they want to accomplish, right? And it's going to be a tall order in all parts of the game, with the whole, so much things happening around this. But based on your experience, where do you think the BRM should focus their efforts, their ideologies and principles to get that substantial value for the organization, for their partners, for their stakeholders, and for the entire ecosystem at large?
You mentioned it in that last statement, Suresh. It's that entire ecosystem that the BRMs are playing a role in, because the relationship it's not just about producing value for that organization. If the organizations are producing value for society, through this new triple bottom line, and the BRMs are involved in that space, then BRMs are actually contributing to, ecosystems globally. The global community can have an impact on the way that business is run. This new triple bottom line, it's been driven by the BRM Institute, but those concepts are, universal.
Right.
It's about humanity, and I think BRMs can play a big role in that space. So, where we've moved from is this role, this idea of the BRM, where it's just a single point of contact between, this manager and that manager, and just sort my relationship things out, is to the single point of focus of this relationship-centered organization, translating those relationships into partnerships, adding value, creating results for these organizations that are purpose-driven, ultimately impacting, the bigger ecosystem and impacting humanity. That's a very big goal. And I think one can get carried away with, the kumbaya. I think, for BRMs, for those of us in the space, it is about the results in the organization and helping that organization to sustain itself and to grow, and to grow in the right direction. But there is that bigger goal that we have.
Excellent point. So you did talk about a very interesting part of the relationship-centered organization, how to evolve culture, build that strategic partnerships, and drive value. And I think what I love about this whole conversation is you switch the whole story in terms of how they all work together in finally delivering some outstanding results for an organization. So it's always a pleasure, Bas, to talk to you and get inspired. And I hope our viewers who have seen this episode of the BRM Brown Bag would have some goosebumps in saying that we have a larger role to play rather than just calling ourselves as BRM. So thank you so much for inspiring us today and the rest of the world as we build a single global BRM community, that we have a far more opportunity to shape and influence things and make this a much better world to live in going into the future. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Suresh. Thanks for having me, and thanks for all you do for the community.
Thank you, everyone.